Good evening and welcome to Zion's Banner. A little bit of a delay there tonight. Hopefully you're hearing me okay. Glad to have everyone on board. And I know that some people will be coming in a little later, most likely. Do want to give a special shout out to Slam RN. She was on a show with Roy Schwartz, Dr. Roy Schwartz, who happens to be the head of the Chicago branch, at least last I knew, of Chosen People Ministries. And so he ended up mentioning me. She ended up doing a little PR work. I really appreciate it. Word of mouth is the best advertisement. So I'm really appreciating that. One of the things I'm going to do is, first of all, to all who support us through Chosen People, thank you so much. I was remiss because we got into such a great Bible study after the study, which is what used to happen to me all the time in Vermont. We'd have the Bible study and we'd have the Bible study. That I do want to acknowledge people. So I'm going to go to the brand real quick and I'm going to acknowledge folks. Now, if you support us through Chosen People, you also make this possible. But most of the people who support me through Chosen People never bother to tune into the shows, with the exception of my dear brother, Steve. So I'm going to roll those credits and kind of say this show was brought to you by my Chosen People supporters and by my Patreon supporters. And I wanted to go ahead and give that thank you because you are truly a precious crowd. If you are not supporting us directly, some of you support us indirectly. And so for all those anonymous supporters out there, I don't want to forget you. So you also belong on that credit list. But some of you want the Lord to be the one who mentions your support directly when we see him face to face. And so I want to say a real big thank you. You guys make this broadcast possible, from equipment to some software to it all. You guys really are a community. If you're watching for the first time and you're not part of the community, join us, dialogue. And if you feel so moved, become more deeply involved. And so I just want to go ahead and do that. Now, it is time to get started. We are continuing in Matthew 24. We have dealt with Jesus' statement that he didn't know the day or the hour. And now we're going to move into some parables that he tells. And I've already gotten some feedback related to one of these parables from one of our watchers. And so I don't do the name thing, not because I don't care about you. I don't have permission to share the person who contacted me. And I love it when you contact me with questions and additional stuff. So since I don't have permission to share the moniker of, or the name of, or the screen name of, I will simply say that I'm going to interact with that view just as far as what was shared with me and where I think it all kind of fits in. And that's to let you know that the things that you share and the questions that you ask are very important to me. And if indeed you are new, feel free to dialogue. Put things in the comments. Feel free to email me. There's the Facebook. There are ways to contact me, and I'm always interested in contacting you. So we're a very interactive group here. You determine your level of interaction. Let's get started with tonight. So I'm going to add the screen share. It does not mean I'm not here, but right now, in order to make the PowerPoint a little bit larger, I've taken me out of and let the PowerPoint do some of the teaching. A special shout out to Gerard. It's great to see him. It's been a little while. People's schedules get busy. They watch other things, but it is always, always good to have people back. And so we move freely in and out and tune in and sometimes cannot be here. And I think of the folks that can't be with us tonight that I've seen before. And we're also in a different scheduling because of the summer months. And you guys all do daylight savings time, but Arizona does not. So we don't change, but the rest of the country and world does. And so that changes things for people. We are going to be looking at the parables of watchfulness. Jesus does repeat things. And since we are going through this section by section, pericope by pericope, do not be surprised if Jesus does not repeat things. And remember that for his disciples, that repeating is so necessary because, to be frankly honest, they don't get it. They just don't get it. If you see anything about the disciples, you see that they don't get it. And so that's kind of something that you will see repetition. And let's be honest, don't you think the Lord has to repeat things with us occasionally? So I'm going to shrink that down a little as we move into our next slide. There we go. And tonight we have with us Ian. So let me just go ahead. Ian's our redheaded guy. And so he's there and he's just going to be asking occasional questions and moving things along and just a lot of fun to have with us. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And I'm going to move us back to the PowerPoint. And I do that occasionally because I want you to know I'm still here, but I want you to be able to see the slides. So I am torn betwixt and between. Particularly when the grammar is involved. I will probably be bringing up the slides and Logos Bible software. Now, the purpose of what is to follow is directly tied to Jesus's statement that they need to be ready because no man knows the hour. We're going to get into that a little bit, but there was a question actually related to, does that mean no man knew the hour, or is this to be understood a different way in light of the cultural surroundings? And so a alternative was proposed to me this week by one of the viewers that maybe in the cultural context, something else is going on. And so this is part of the interaction I've had this week. But in either case, I want you to note that the focus is being ready, and it's imperative in the Greek and very important. And remember, these guys don't think there's going to be any delay between Jesus and the setting up of the kingdom. They do not have a 2,000-year time span in their minds, not even a little bit. And so they are expecting the kingdom to be set up very, very clearly, and that's what they're expecting. And so this being ready is going to be very important for them because they are taken back by the fact that things don't happen when it would occur to them that they're supposed to happen. A lot of things are in the plan of God, and the spreading of the gospel that they don't quite understand. And so where this may seem obvious or unimportant to us is vital to their morale to get these things down. And, wow, sorry about that. There was a slip. There's another slip. I don't know why. There we go. I don't like that. So I'm going to switch to the other one real quick and slip here and bring this down for you, because that slide is not displaying the way it should display. There we go. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then I'm going to go back here so that it looks a little better for you. And there are those occasional cases where those sorts of things happen. So let's deal with the first of these parables. Who then is the faithful and wise servant whom the master made ruler over his household to give them food in due season? Blessed is the servant whom his master, when he comes, will find so doing. Assuredly, I say to you that he will make him ruler over all his goods. But if that evil servant says in his heart, my master is delaying his coming, and so begins to beat his fellow servants and eat and drink with the drunkards, the master of the servant will come on a day when he is not looking for him, and in an hour when he is not aware of, and will cut him in two and appoint him his portion with the hypocrites. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now, that's the first parable that Jesus ends up giving. And so I wanted to get that text out there, and I broke it down into the parables because there are 3 of them. And so it behooves us to go ahead and kind of divide these up. And so there's our text. Notice Jesus is going to give the qualities of a wise and faithful servant. And this illustrates those qualities. So, hey, if you're looking for the well done, thou good and faithful servant, this parable is really very, very apropos for you and was important for the disciples. So they're going to learn what Jesus expects of them as servants through this. Now, I want to take a few minutes here to highlight something, and I hope you can see it. I'm going to bring it up. I'm going to say something so shocking to our society that it is almost unheard of. The Greek word here is doulos, and it actually means slave. Okay, one who is a slave and obeys the commands of his or her master. It's used in Matthew 8:9. The centurion claims, he says to his servant, doulos, slave, do this, and he does it. Paul often referred to himself as a servant doulos of Jesus Christ. Jesus bought him and owns him. Do you understand the import of this in our society? I have seen so much discussion, and I don't poo-poo it, around race relations, because we live in a society that is supposed to give equal rights to all. But I want to let people know, and I've been thinking about this because I'm planning to go out and do some street preaching, that really we are all slaves. Whoever slaves is a sin to it. Satan is called the prince of the power of the air. And he has a certain level of jurisdiction. And so all men are born into the domain of darkness, and they have a sin nature that dominates them. And so all of us are slaves. The answer is, who are we a slave to? And so I just want to throw that out there, that really the Bible does not give us a picture of men being allowed or women to be totally autonomous agents. Human beings are not designed to be totally autonomous. And that's what people are attempting to practice as sinners. And the word here is actually slave. So God doesn't have a problem in per se with individuals being slaves, as long as they're a slave volitionally, and that's why the term bondservant is used, to the right thing. And man was designed to serve and worship God. And the Westminster Confession of Faith, which I don't agree with everything on, certainly goes ahead and makes this clear. And so this North American idea that we are totally autonomous beings, totally individual, and can have everything customized in our lives the way we want it, is antithetical to the biblical worldview. And Christians need to be challenged with that. And they really need to understand that really, as those who have come to Jesus Christ, we have accepted the idea that Jesus bought us and we belong to him. And we shouldn't be put off by that, but we should be ready to realize that. And I like this better so you can see the slide over me. Okay. But that needs to be understood. We're all slaves, and we all need to be asking ourselves on a daily basis who we're a slave to. So, hi, welcome to Zion's Banner broadcast by Dr. Jeff Cran, who is a slave, volitionally a bondservant or a bondslave of the Lord Jesus Christ, who bought me with his own precious blood and paid the purchase price so that I could indeed be free from the dominion of darkness, which was surrounding me and drowning me, and my own sin nature, which was dominating me and causing me to make really poor choices and not understand the real meaning of life and separating me from the God of my forefathers. Now, if I can turn that into a street message, I am going to be using that. I'm just thinking through how that should look. But that would be an interesting thing to propose to people. And by the way, people have proved they're slaves this year. Regardless about how you feel about COVID, people were slaves to fear on some level to a certain extent. People were really afraid and they were really nervous. And I saw a lot of people very tied up in fear this year. I'm not commenting on what we should do and shouldn't do. I'm commenting on the fact that what was going on produced fear and anxiety in people that they were very, very bound by this particular year. Well, let's not spend forever there. Now, who are they slaves to? Well, they're slaves to Kyrios. This is an interesting word because Jehovah's Witnesses want to make a big deal about how this is not the name of God. And they really kind of like to camp out on this and say this is not a name for God. This is just Sir. It has a lot of meanings in the Greek, but it is used as a name for God in the Septuagint. And that's terribly interesting to me because I use the Septuagint to see what Greek concepts refer to what Hebrew concepts. And Kyrios is used and translated in terms of God, where it is used for Adon or Adonai, which, by the way, is used of God. There are places where it's used. You will see the Lord God. You will see the King James has an interesting way of dealing with this whole thing. But you will see the word Lord, Adon, used with that tetragrammaton. And there are even places where it is equivalent to the divine name. Now, remember, the Septuagint was a translation used by Jews, so it wasn't a strictly Gentile, good news for modern man sort of translation. It was used by the Jews, and it can be used to refer to Sir, and it is used of human beings. And so I just kind of want to spend a little time with that. It can be used as respectful address. There are 192 instances where it can have the secular sense of owner. It can be used of God and ruler. But what I want you to see here is the usage of it in terms of God and the usage of it in connection with the parable doesn't lead us to believe that it's just a common sort of Sir sort of thing. And so given the linguistic connection between the Greek word for Lord and its Hebrew usage, as a reference to God, we can assume the master is understood to be Jesus or God the Father, or Jesus or God in general. Now, I'm going to allow that, given the parable being given to the disciples and who Jesus is pointing towards himself as the master who will be going away, because the implication is that this master will go away and the faithful servant is the one serving and honoring his commitment to his Lord, even when his Lord is absent. Jesus is going to be going away, and this is addressed to the disciples. So it's to prepare them. And in that light, I think the master there is best understood as Jesus. Well, how about the slaves? Who are they? Well, the slaves are the ones who profess themselves to be disciples of Jesus. So if you're a disciple of Jesus, you are a slave of Jesus Christ. That's just who you are. You were bought. The purchase price for you as a sinner under the domain of darkness was paid, so that you could be freed or loosed from that domain. When man sinned, Satan and his forces gained some level of jurisdiction over the earth. Actually, Heiser goes into this to a greater degree. And so the slaves of Jesus in the parable are the disciples directly and those who profess to be disciples now. So this is teaching for the believer. This is not teaching for the unbeliever, except to point out that they are not under contractual covenant obligation in the same way relationally to the master. But this is really for us. This is really inside stuff for the disciples. Now, why is the evil servant evil? Well, the evil servant's not taking seriously the return of his master. Remember, in the parable, it says that the wicked servant says, my master is gone away. He's not returning. And then he begins to act the way he wants to act. Okay, so it's not like anyone's forcing this servant to beat the other servants and neglect his responsibilities. But the end result here, if I bring up the Logos here, okay, the evil servant says in his heart, the master is delaying his coming. So the evil servant is not taking the return of the master seriously, and he is acting according to the way he wants to act. So he wants to act this way, and he has thrown off the restraint of his commitment to his master because his master has not come. Now, it's been roughly 2,000 plus years. The master has delayed. And the church teaches very little about the return of Jesus. I am in an excellent church with a great pastor, but the abundance of sermons about the Lord's return are not there. And I believe that the lack of sermons emphasizing the Lord's return is probably not helping the commitment of Christians. And I'm not talking about date setting. I'm just talking about Christians being told, hey, look, Jesus is coming back. You need to be serious. End of story. And these parables could be taught. So it is a good thing to discuss these things without necessarily sensationalizing them or date picking. We can say that as servants of the Lord Jesus Christ, we need to take the return of Jesus terribly seriously. And yet it is hard to do so because the delay has been so very long. And so I could see where we could really get kind of lulled into this whole thing and really get kind of complacent, because 2,000 years is a long time. And I think that sort of has happened, and particularly in the West, where life looks pretty much the same. And so the lesson of the parable here is that truly expecting the master is connected to faithful service and produces it. Failing to take the master's return seriously will result in not fulfilling proper service and potentially sliding into vice. Not necessarily to the level of the servant in the parable, but distraction will lead Actually, losing focus leads to distraction, and distraction to disobedience. And we know this. I was a young teenage kid. I'm a father of several daughters, and young men would say they can't control themselves, but I assure you, if the father entered the room while they were not controlling themselves, they'd gain self-control very quickly. And so that's sort of the thing. The presence of God and expecting Jesus' return are powerful inducements to holy living. But we're not going to stop there. That's not the only parable. And here's where we're going to talk about the viewpoint that was given to me by someone this week. And, if he should watch this and wants to leave a comment that I could state who it was, I would so do so. This is the parable of the 10 virgins. Now, this is a very interesting parable because it is phrased like a normal parable would be. The kingdom of heaven is like, and we see that with parables, shall be likened to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. Now, 5 of them were wise, and 5 of them were foolish. Who were the foolish? Those who were foolish took their lamps and took no oil with them. And at midnight, the cry was heard, "Behold, the bridegroom cometh out, is coming, go out to meet him." And those virgins arose, trimmed their lamps, and the foolish said to the wise, "Give us some oil, for our lamps are going out." But the wise answered, "No, lest we should not have enough oil for us and you, but rather go to those who sell and buy." And I'm going to look at the larger print here. Go to those who sell and buy for yourselves. While they went in to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the wedding, and the door was shut. And afterwards, the other virgins came along, saying, "Lord, Lord, open to us." But he answered and said, "Assuredly, I say to you, I do not know you. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour in which the Son of Man is coming." And this is the parable of the virgins. And a shout out to John Williams. I think he just got here, so I just noticed him. And so this is the second parable. Now, the parables all work together as one unit, so they're about the same thing, but a little differently. Now, what was proposed to me by one of the community is that Jesus was not saying in the previous verse that we covered last week that Jesus did not know the hour, but what he was really saying is that he did not have authority over the hour. In other words, the timing of the hour was not his to command or to determine. And that's really what was being said, and that's what was proposed to me. We do have, and he said on the basis of Jewish wedding theology, or the use of the Jewish wedding as a picture of the Lord's return. And so I'm going to go ahead and discuss the Jewish wedding just a little bit and talk about that. Now, we do not have a lot of records. Let me be frank with you about that. We do not have a lot of detailed records related to the Jewish wedding. So let me put this up a little higher, okay? But there are some things that are better recorded than others. So I'm going to comment on things that we can be pretty sure of as far as how well they're attested to, and then things that are probably true, but they're a little less attested to. The sealing of the covenant included a transfer of gifts. This is very common in the Near East. It could establish the wealth and status of the future husband. Okay, now we see that clearly with the picking of Isaac's bride, that Eliezer, who is sent, offers gifts to Rebekah and her family. This was very natural. And it established that Isaac could indeed take care of Rebekah, a concern of the family. And it also kind of made it look like the donor was offering himself also, and the gift sealed the covenant also established the donor's authority over the bride. I know that that's going to rankle Westerners. because that makes it look like the wife is property. There is a strong sense of authority connected with the husband. And the woman is coming out from the authority of her male relative or father and coming under the husband's tent or household. And so this sort of established that the husband was now the authority. It was his tent that she was under. The next stage in the procedure is what we called betrothal. Now, remember this from the Gospels. Joseph was betrothed with Mary, but before they had come together, thus before the wedding was completed, Mary was found with child. Now, we don't consider engagement very important in our society, but in ancient societies, betrothal carried the weight of marriage. In fact, divorce was required to break betrothal. So even though they aren't married, they're in a state which carried the same authority as marriage. It's first mentioned from biblical text point of view in Exodus 22:16. The term is used several times in Deuteronomy. And betrothal, again, is like marriage. Anyone who violated a betrothed virgin would be stoned according to the law of Deuteronomy for violating his neighbor's wife. So it has the solemnity of marriage, but it is not consummated or it is not completed. And it has the idea of taking possession. Okay. There is some distinction. During the betrothal period, the bridegroom was exempt from military service. It's assumed that betrothal formed a part of the permanent relationship, and we see that in Matthew 1:18. That's the comment about Joseph and Luke. The first biblical wedding story of a wedding being celebrated by a feast is in the story of Joseph. So we see that there's not a detailed sort of thing about Jewish weddings, carefully laid out all in one text. Bridesmaids were mentioned in the account of Samson's wedding. So we do get the idea of bridesmaids from a text that would indicate it. We also see it in Psalm 45, where we have the bridesmaids of the bride mentioned in terms of the Messianic king. But there's not a detailed record of exactly how the marriage contract was recorded until the book of Tobit. Now, the marriage contract is called the ketubah. And in a Jewish wedding, there is always a ketubah signed by both the bride and groom to this day. Admittedly, when we renewed our vows, me and my wife did sign a ketubah, which I'm still trying to get hung up on our wall because Jewish people generally do that. But my bride has not been as anxious to hang that up as I have, just because that's not something that she was as used to as I was. Okay. The contract isn't valid until it's consummated. And so there was a cohabitation period that was involved. Samson left his bride before the 7-day period. And so the bride considered the parents, who weren't really great people, okay, considered the marriage void and gave her to another man. Now, Samson doesn't feel that way about that. He's pretty put out. But that could explain it. The traditional formula pronounced at a wedding is found in the Elephantine contracts. The husband made the declaration, "She is my wife and I am her husband from this day forever." By the 2nd century, the declaration was simpler, merely stating, "Thou shalt be my wife." Wow, that sounds real romantic, but that's a statement to everybody involved. So this is what we kind of know. Now, there's Talmudic passages that regulate things later on, but it's not like a wedding planner could follow this information very clearly. And so when we start talking about some of this stuff, just be aware that it's not as historically attested to as some people might think about it being attested to. There are some other things attested to that we do need to be aware of. One of the things that is attested to in Jeremiah is the procession of the groom and his friends. In later periods, the procession of bride and groom parties who left their homes separately and met at an agreed upon location. Now we find that in Maccabees. So that's prior to the giving of this parable, generally returning to the groom's home for the wedding feast. And now we see where, the background of Maccabees figures into Matthew's discussion. Okay. And then you have a feast that could last 7 days or 14. Now, Tobit records a longer. All right. Sometimes included betrothal or bride ceremonies. Ruth's request that Boaz spread his skirt over her was to indicate that he was taking her as a wife. Now, understand, there's some really cool stuff in that I don't want to pass up. It says the corner of your cloak, and that's the same Hebrew word for wing. And so the minute Boaz spreads his cloak over Ruth, the corner, she's coming under his wing or wings. And that's real good for messianic prophecy when you understand that in terms of the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in his wings. And people always look at that and this is some sort of bird image. No, it's really not. The corner and wing is the same word in Hebrew. And so that even goes back to the woman with the issue of blood grabbing the wing of Jesus's cloak, the corner, and she was healed because the Son of Righteousness will arise with healing in his wings. She was taking prophecy very literally and believing the word of God, and so she is healed. So that is just some cool additional stuff. Normally, consummation occurs on the first night. We don't want to go too much into the proof of virginity and all that great stuff. Okay, that's not very PG. But understand, ancient societies were very concerned with the fact that the woman did not know another man, and people get into say, why was this such a big deal? A child's going to come along. Tribal lineages and family lineages were tied to that child, and if you didn't know who that child was, then you have a problem with lineage and fulfillment of tribal responsibilities and the preserving of the tribes of Israel, which was very important to prophecy and to the plan of God. Beyond that, in the ancient world, and this is something we don't get in today's society, a child had the right to know his parentage, his ancestry. And I still believe that that's a basic right. The right to all sorts of things, to me, includes the right to know one's progenitors. And the ancient world recognized that right. And I think that's where I would press some of the issues around reproductive ethics is, does the child being deprived of the right to know its progenitors? Okay. So here's what we end up having here. This is a little small, but you know what? It's not like I can't make it bigger. I can go down here and I can go ahead and do that. Okay. Well, I can almost do that. Let me go down here. There we go. And some of this is a little smaller than I'd like. And so I'm just going to up the text here a little bit for you. I don't like it when the text is too small. And then I'll go back here and you should be able to see it better. Let me make things better for you. In contrast to the elaborate procession, divorce was simple, a little simpler than maybe was good. A man could divorce his wife when he found fault in her over any particular matter. Now, the rabbis liberalized this. And this right was not abolished until the 11th century. Divorce was discouraged. However, gradually the procedure became more complex. There was a school of rabbinical thought that if she burnt your toast, literally, you could divorce her. Okay. Now, there's a big problem because how do I get rid of a wife I don't want? Well, I could claim that she was not a virgin, that she had known another man. There's a whole procedure for that because that could get the woman killed. Remember that Joseph is very concerned because of this situation. He does not want to put her to public shame and possibly worse. And so that's where things end up coming. By the way, if the wife was abducted, the husband had to ransom her. Interesting. If the wife became deaf or mute or an alcoholic after the marriage, he couldn't divorce her. So that's just to let you know that disability was not necessarily accepted as a way to do that. Here's what we don't know for certain, but we believe it to be very sound, that the Jewish wedding included the groom going to make an offer to the bride. Now, we have reasons to believe that because of the exchange of goods, and there are Jewish traditions. When the father accepted it, then the bride had some say. And if the bride took the cup of grape juice or wine that was being offered by the bridegroom, she was agreeing to the ceremony, the marriage. And this included the setting of the dowry. Now, that's very interesting from the standpoint of communion and remembering the Lord's death. And if you regard his death as the payment price for the church and for believers, which I have good biblical reason to believe, okay, then the dowry for you and I and for the church was indeed the death of Jesus Christ and his temporary separation from the Father. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? It doesn't state it directly, but there are good indications. We do know that the best man went out. This parable is based on something, and shouted, "Behold, the bridegroom cometh." And really the role of the bridesmaids, because you think they're just like hanging around and doing girly stuff, is to prepare the bride so that when the shout of the bridegroom comes, the bride is ready and they all go out to meet. And then the bridal procession and the bridegroom go back to the father's house. And the father has determined whether the house that the bridegroom has made is ready for the bride. So that initiates him going to get the bride. And that's where the discussion came in. Is the language that Jesus doesn't know the hour only indicating that his father, as the bridegroom, is in charge of setting the date and time for him to go get his bride? And that he is not indicating at all that he doesn't know the hour, but he's indicating he has no authority over the hour. And that was proposed to me. It's a very interesting interpretation. Okay. And, they're good illustrations for eschatology, and they bring spiritual illuminations. We can't be dogmatic about everything. And so that's the comment. So let me tell you why I'm not quite ready to go there. And I'm going to bring up Logos for this. Okay. Why am I not quite ready to believe that that's all that we're dealing with? Is that that Jesus had no authority over the hour. So I'm going to go back to the comment and give you some reasons why I'm not ready to take that point of view yet. Okay. And so I want to get back up here. Back up to where Jesus says, okay, I'm in 36. Hopefully you can see it pretty good. I can bring it up a little more. No, I really can't. There you go. There's your 200%. Okay. And the verse in question is this one. And we talked about it in terms of the kenosis, which is the usual interpretation of this. And this alternate interpretation was presented to me. And so I'm going to take a few minutes and deal with it. Now, it is a very interesting interpretation to view this through the Jewish wedding ceremony. There are some reasons I'm not quite ready to go all the way down that road at this point. So let me look at a few of these. First of all, the not knowing here. Let's look at the word not knowing. No one knows, okay? There's our word for knows. It's from the word oida. And it's to have kind of an internal sort of personal, it's not just knowledge by observation, okay? It's more internal than that. The exact nuances of oida and gnosko are a little difficult. They tend to overlap a little. Okay, so if I click on this here, okay, it's generally to know. It's in the perfect, which means does not know and sort of continues not to know. Okay, it has continuing ramifications. Now that verb has two objects to it. Okay, what are the two objects that are connected? Well, no one is one of the objects. Okay, there's your no one. Udes. That's one object. No one knows. Okay. And the not even here. This is the other object. Not even. Uda hoi angeloi. Okay. There's your other object. Not even the angels. Just to further clarify, which angels, of course, we have in of heaven. Just a genitive there. You know, it's not big. It's just a further clarification of what's going on there. And so we have two. Now, if it's true that the word knows there means only does not have authority, then I would have to read the sentence like this. But the day and the hour, nobody has authority to fix the date, not even the angels of heaven, but the Father only. Now, what that would infer to me is that the angels do know the time, just like Jesus knows the time. They simply can't pick the date. They have no authority over the time, but they have knowledge of the time. I'm not quite sure that the angels do have knowledge of the time of the Lord's return. So I'm going, unless I was sure of that, I don't know that I'd want to say that. There's a strong emphasis in the Greek on the Father only. Now, the word but is actually can be translated better except, and may, except the Father alone. Monos indicates alone. So whatever this is, I would then have to wonder why the emphasis. And then beyond that, why use oidos, oida? Isn't there a perfectly good Greek word for authority? Exousia, dominion, jurisdiction. Are there not Greek words? Could Jesus not have said, but of that hour, no one has jurisdiction, not even the angels in heaven, but the Father only? Is there a perfectly good way to express that? I don't know that there's no perfectly good way to express that if that's what God through Matthew wants to highlight. Now, again, this is an interesting understanding, but does that really bring me to that place in its understanding? It seems to be about knowledge too, because they did not know in the days of Noah that the flood was coming until it came. You mean they didn't pick the date of the flood until it happened? Now, admittedly, this is from Gnosko. So I want to be honest with the text. And one could claim that oida is now Gnosko here, and the author is highlighting. But this word Gnosko here, I don't think is that different. What may be being emphasized is that no one by observation or through the senses knew that the flood was coming. So the change in word could be more qualitative in terms of what's being said there than it has to indicate one authority and the other knowledge of. Okay. So there are reasons for me to believe that while that's an interesting interpretation, I'm not quite ready to go ahead and buy into that interpretation. But I appreciate it, and I don't find it to be deeply unbiblical, and it doesn't take anything away from the kenosis. Because there's a lot about Jesus that can only be explained if he temporarily laid aside his attributes of greatness, which would include his infinity and the omnis. Like God is omnipresent, but Jesus was actually in one place at one time, like you and I. He experienced that creaturehood where he was not every place at the same time, the way the Father is. So the kenosis is still vital doctrine and something we have to understand. And so this is neither an unbiblical idea, neither does it eliminate the need for the doctrine of the kenosis, but the text does not necessarily lead me to that conclusion with the same certainty as the friend who shared it. So I'm not quite ready to go there, but I don't find it problematic. I just don't think the text lets me go that far. And by the way, I have no problem with positions being interesting if they don't violate the Bible or eliminate an important doctrine or impinge on an important doctrine. This does not impinge on doctrine. It's more a question of how we're to understand it in the context. And I would say at this point, I'm still going to understand it in terms of nobody knowing except the Father, and still have no problem with it in terms of Jesus's creaturehood. You could go the other way, and I would agree firmly that the Father has control over the date. But I don't know that I'm ready to read that into this, given the way the language works and the parties involved. So that's just kind of a takeoff. Now, this was fun because it was real interaction, real interaction from folks who are into the show and enjoy the show and are committed to what we're doing here, and they have a different take on something. Okay. Just a little warning to me to avoid getting too political. Okay, I'm more concerned about what people felt and how they reacted. But point taken. Or maybe that's in terms of free Palestine. I don't know. If it's me, I just feel that people got a real good lesson about the brevity of life this past year. And that lesson may be very good for using for the gospel. Okay. Just a clarification. It was more about Palestine. I think it is useful to say to people, hey, were you concerned about death at any point this year? Well, hey, then you might want to know where you're going. Kind of cool point. Did you feel totally safe this year? Well, maybe you need to run to the one who provides eternal safety. I mean, that's not a bad point to make to people. I think we have a possibility of using some of the events this year to really point people to the Lord. And if for no other reason than making good use of the events of our world to point people to Jesus Christ, I'm willing to do that. Not to get into politics, I don't understand the Free Palestine, and I don't know who to free it from. And I'm going to leave that and ask that be left, just being aware that I do believe in the literal promises to the literal people of Israel. You can go shame on me. I'm a Jewish missionary, and I read the promises to Israel the way a Jew hearing them would read them. And I think the way an author writing to the Jewish people, being moved by the Holy Spirit, would write them. So that's where I'm coming from. But that's a whole other story. And please, let's not go into that. We can have an episode on replacement theology in church history if we wanted to. But Jesus isn't discussing that in this parable. So we're going to let it go. What is the upshot? Jesus is coming. We need to be prepared. We need to be the good servants. We need to be about his business, even though his return has seemed greatly delayed by our standards. And this has caused us to relax maybe a little more than we should. And so that's a warning to us to be about the Father's business while the Master tarries. And that's what that is about. There is a third parable there. It will have the same thing going to it. And that's a far country, and that's the talents. And I want to go into that parable because I think the talents are illustrative of the fact that we have something to contribute to the kingdom too. And so we will go through that, but we'll go through it in terms of what the servants did or didn't do, which is a little different in the final parable than it was in the previous two. Just by way of noticing, you will notice that the parable has the wicked servant going somewhere and consciously experiencing something. When I look at these, I know they're parables, but I think Jesus is really warning people about something. And so you're going to have to figure out how you want to do that. But full admission, I believe in an eternal conscious hell. Not because I like the doctrine, but because I think it does some important things as far as God and who he is and us, who we are being made in his image. So enough said on that. That was just a little sideline to close us up. Be ready, be prepared, and be active, although your master tarries, so that you might be the wise and faithful servant. And with that note, I will see you next week. God bless. Thank you for being here. And next time, be looking, Facebook, and I will be creating events. So if you haven't subscribed, when you subscribe, you'll know when I be on, and I think it will tell you what the topic is, so you'll know where we're going as far as our topic. All right. Thank you to Brother Steve. Thank you, John Williams, for being here. I know you like to stimulate our thinking with some of your comments. Do not feel offended. Please do not feel that you can't be here. Just know that because you like to stimulate our thinking, sometimes you're stimulating our thinking in roads that we are not prepared in the broadcast to go down. And so when I can follow a rabbit trail, I will. But if the rabbit trail veers too long from the main road, sometimes I will save that. So be blessed, be at peace, and I will see you soon. I'm going to pop that Erev Tov. Hopefully, Slam RN will actually see this, and she'll see the shout out to her. And I appreciate all of you. Word of mouth, we Blue supporters, we picked up another subscriber. Get the word out. Other people may want to see this. So if you can think of someone who might benefit from these broadcasts, invite them. I'd love to have some folks that are dear to you joining us. Erev Tov, and see you next week.